Hi guys, welcome to the Women Unlimited podcast. Our guest today is Nkemdilim Uwaje Begho. She's the CEO of Futuresoft and she sits on several boards: Stanbic IBTC Holdings PLC, Lagos State Research and Innovation Council, Society for Corporate Governance, Novare Fund Manager Ltd, and the BudgIT Foundation. It's very sweet to say I'm on the board of, but it comes with responsibilities, right? So what are the things that you think that people often overlook?
I think the most overlooked responsibility is probably the fiduciary duties that you have and responsibilities, right?
So if anything happens to the company,
you can go to jail, right? Or you can be fined, or you can be liable for the loss that the company has made.
what kind of early steps can they take in their careers to sort of like position themselves for like board seats?
So the first thing I would say is get yourself ready, right? Build your network, because it's people who sit on boards that recommend people to sit on boards.
Yeah.
Another way of positioning yourself could be simply to actually report to a board, right? Because you learn a lot when you are actually in that room with board members. Then you start understanding, how do they think? What are the things that are important to them?
What would you say is more important, visibility or competence? And how do you sort of like strike the balance?
I feel like you can't package hot air. So competence is, to me, the foundation, right? Because you can make it into that room, right? Through the visibility that you've created.
And not be able to perform.
Exactly, right?
Welcome, Nkem.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for agreeing to be a part of this podcast. So when I was thinking about setting up this Women Unlimited podcast, I really wanted to speak to women who were not just in corporate leadership, but had served on boards or serve on boards. Because I think that there's a lot of information and tools for entrepreneurs, but there's not a lot for people who in board seats or have board seats. There's not a lot of information out there about how you even get on boards. So obviously I know that you're an entrepreneur primarily, but I've always found it so interesting how you attract all these fantastic like board positions, and it's something that I feel like a lot of women are not privileged to have access to. So let's talk a little bit about your journey and the first time like you sort of got a board opportunity.
Okay. So the first board I served on was the board of Social Media Week Lagos.
Okay.
And it was quite interesting because I think they wanted someone who would give the perspective of sort of a bit of the younger generation, but someone who was in tech, who understood social media and who understood digital. And I sort of went in there with sort of zero experience in terms of corporate governance, and with a very operational mindset. And I very quickly realized that that wasn't very useful in that setting, right? And then I started to actually just learn, right, about the role that you play as a board member. And I started to just embrace being more of someone who guides the strategy, someone who is your sounding board, someone who holds you accountable, someone who ensures that, you don't, wreck through your budget and stuff like that, right? And I think that was sort of the beginning, right? And after that, I was like, okay, this is actually pretty cool. And definitely something that I would like to explore, and just keep doing. And I realized that in terms of, sort of just experience and perspectives, there was a lot that I could bring to the table just simply from working across so many different industries.
So, okay, let's talk a little bit about what it actually means to sit on a board, like in terms of what the responsibilities are, especially the ones that people overlook. Because, it's very sweet to say I'm on the board of, but it comes with responsibilities, right? So what are the things that you think that people often overlook?
I think the most overlooked responsibility is probably the fiduciary duties that you have and responsibilities, right?
So if anything happens to the company,
you can go to jail, right? Or you can be fined, or you can be liable for the loss that the company has made. So those are things that you have to weigh very seriously, and you also have to make sure that you're on a good board, right? On a good company board. So it's not something that you just take lightly, especially when it's a regulated industry. You have regulators like Central Bank, NGX, NCC, NITA. So you have to be really, really careful in those regulated industries, because there's a lot of compliance and a lot of responsibilities that fall squarely to the board. And if you then don't, sort of execute that duty of care, then it could end quite badly.
Yeah, been there. Because I think that, especially when I was younger, I was very excited about, board opportunities, and you feel like a superstar, like, oh my God. But then sometimes things just don't work out, like you said, in a regulated industry as well. And there are consequences, like, for sitting on a board, because you're essentially responsible for whatever the company does, good or bad. And I think it's something that people might take lightly, because we're not thinking long-term enough about what the possible downsides are. So I think it's really important to think through, am I making the right decision for myself, long-term?
I think, when people say, oh, I want to be on a board, I'm like, okay, what kind of board, right? Have you thought about that? Have you thought about what kind of company you want to serve in? And sometimes, you take on a role. I had a friend call me, and, she's like, oh my God, I've taken on this board seat in a fintech, and she's like, the board reports are flimsy. There's not enough information. Can you just kind of give a little bit of insight in terms of what I should be expecting? And I'm like, it should have X, Y, Z. And she's like, it has none of those things. And the CEO is unwilling to even add more things into the report, and all the other board members are just like sort of rubber stamping, and just they come there, they're like, yes, we have 1 hour, please, let's be going. And I'm like, that is crazy, right? At Stanbic, we spent probably like 6 or 7 hours in one board meeting, right? And there's a reason for it, right? There's a reason for the things that we look at. So I told her, I said, you need to resign from this board, because this industry is still CBN regulated, right? And clearly this company is having major issues that you've already seen in your first board meeting. So you need to run as fast as you can.
It's always an honor and a privilege until something happens. Exactly. But just moving forward, for professionals who are aiming for board positions, right? What kind of early steps can they take in their careers to sort of position themselves for board seats?
So I think, depending on how your organization is structured, sometimes there are internal board seats that are available as well. So for example, when you look at a holdco structure, like most of the banks have, a lot of the EDs actually sit on the subsidiary boards and basically represent the interest of the holdco on those boards. So that could be one way of positioning yourself, right? Another way of positioning yourself could be simply to actually report to a board, right? Because you learn a lot when you are actually in that room with board members. Then you start understanding, how do they think? What are the things that are important to them? You prepare the reports, you learn from doing that.
Sorry, let's go back a bit. What do you mean report to a board? Do you mean when you're already on a board?
No, so you could
reporting to them, or
no. So you could be someone who is in the management team, right? So even if you're not C-suite, but you maybe head up a division, that division would come and present to the board, right? And in doing that, you have to prepare, or it might be a board committee that they present to, right? So, for example, I chair the IT committee at Stanbic. So all the IT functions basically have to report to the board. So they all have different reports that they bring, from cyber to data to AI to just overall infrastructure and things like that. And the executives that are in those roles are learning every time they come into a boardroom, because they get asked questions. When we review the board report that they've submitted, and I'm like, okay, this stuff, take it out because it's not actually important to the board. Add these things in. So I think if you're in that type of role, you can learn quite a lot by being someone who is preparing the reports that go to the board. And then I think if you're really interested in corporate governance, then start working on your membership in IOD or Society for Corporate Governance, or do a training with the Boardroom Africa. There are quite a few board readiness programs out there, and especially
WIMBIZ has one.
WIMBIZ has WIMBIZ has WIMBoard, and then you start just even understanding, okay, how does this really work, right? And what do I need to do to really be ready? What are the nuances of corporate governance that I need to understand? And how do the skills that I have actually tie into it, right? Because a lot of the time, I speak to people and they're like, oh, well, I'm in PR or in corporate comms and I don't think that, I can be on a board. And I'm like, actually, no, because boards now, one of the biggest risks that companies face is reputation management, right? So you need someone who's an expert in that field. So if you then say, okay, you know what, I'm going to learn some other additional skill like sustainability or ESG in addition to what I already do, then you become an asset to, actually sit on a board. But you need to be ready, right? And I think it's easy to sort of feel like, oh yeah, I can do this. But the truth is that there are so many layers to it, and you just keep learning, and you need to keep being curious, because there's a lot of compliance that you need to understand. There's also new trends around corporate governance and risk, cyber risk and sustainability and financial risk. So there's a lot of things that you actually
have to consider
and learn. Yeah.
I feel like you're someone who has been very intentional about building your networks. And I feel like you attract a lot of sponsors that will go and advocate for you, like, in rooms that you're not in. I think you're really great at that. Can you talk a little bit about, like, so for example, like the Stanbic board seats, like how you attracted that kind of opportunity? Because it's a PLC, it's such a huge, sort of like responsibility. So what is that process kind of like?
So I think one of the things that I did, so I had obviously all these sort of smaller boards that I was part of, and I used that to actually build a network, because most of those boards had very prominent people who sit on other boards, right? So that was one. The second thing that I've been very intentional about is really just building my network and plugging myself into communities and networks of people who are in those type of rooms, and who, when opportunities come, can say, oh, actually I know someone, right? But that also requires some level of visibility. So I've done a lot of writing and training around just digital transformation for both executives and board members. And I think that really is one of the things, that thought leadership and visibility that is out there, and just people also experiencing me
on a board.
Not just on a board, but in a training, for example, right? So I may be in the boardroom, not as a board member, but coming to talk to you about AI or whatever it is. And that is, when they then are looking, because when boards sort of seek for board members, they usually seek for specific skills, right? So at the time, Stanbic was looking for a digital board member, and they ideally wanted someone who was female, right? So they had, ask their board members, okay, can you suggest anyone? And there was a WhatsApp group community of women that I'm in called Women Inspire, and within that community, I used to share blog posts that I would write on digital transformation, on sort of IT governance and things like that. And there was someone who sat on the bank board that was in that group that I had never met. And she put my name forward. So when they called me, I was like, oh, who recommended me for this? And then they said this name, and I'm like, okay, I don't know who this is. Yeah, but that I think just shows that knowing your stuff is really the foundation of everything, right? And also putting yourself out there and making sure that you have visibility for the right things.
So what's interesting is that there's visibility and there's competence, right? And what would you say is more important, or is there one that's more important? Because there are people who are great at doing what they do and they might have the skill set that the board is looking for, but no one knows because they don't write articles, they don't have any thought leadership around it. Or there are people who don't have as much in terms of the competence, but they have the visibility. So they are packaging very, very well. So they know the people. So what would you say is more important, visibility or competence? And how do you sort of strike the balance?
So I feel like you can't package hot air.
Yeah.
So competence is, to me, the foundation, right? Because you can make it into that room, right? Yeah. Through the visibility that you've created. But when, exactly, right? And usually boards have interview processes, right? Multiple layers of interviews with the executive, with the nominations committee, with the chairman of the board. And at some point, if you don't know what you're doing, they'll find you out, right? Because it just requires a few questions to, sort of scatter your packaging. Yeah. So I think the competence really is key, especially now that corporate governance is really evolving and is getting focused more on the skills that the individuals bring to the table. And then also, obviously, things like what kind of network do you even have, right? What other value do you bring to the table? Are you someone that is, very well connected in an industry? Have you led a market expansion before? All of those things. When you read, job applications for board members, you start seeing the type of competencies that they're actually looking for, right? So the visibility is, I think, also important, right? Because as you said, you can know all of these things and be the best candidate, but nobody knows you, right? So I think that once you get into executive leadership, you really do need to work on how do I create that visibility and thought leadership? How do I position myself within my industry? How do I build my network? How do I make sure that I'm talking to the right people in order to unlock these opportunities?
So when you think, we talk about that, what role do you think that building a personal brand plays in being considered board ready? What should that brand feel and look like? Yeah.
So I think very professional. I think that's the main thing, because a board role comes with a lot of responsibility. And a lot of boards actually go and check your social media, right? So if you're seen there, I don't know, doing drugs or just being irresponsible,
they'll count against you.
Exactly, right? So I think one thing in terms of the brand is a really good LinkedIn profile, because that, I think, is the first place where people would come to look for you. Another thing is to actually have a board CV. So that's very, very different from your professional CV, because you have to highlight things that are important to the board, right? And obviously, if you have any kind of experience, you put it on there as well. But I do think that, especially for this upcoming generation, personal branding is becoming more and more important, but it has to be done in a very professional manner, so that it's not tacky or too much or too loud, because depending on the industry, depending on the type of organization and company, they may not be looking for someone who is really
wild
loud and out there, right? But they wouldn't mind someone who, maybe does a lot of speaking engagements or writes articles or has written books or whatever it is, right? Because that is thought leadership in the industry and even gives them credibility.
So are there any specific certifications, programs, that women can sort of enroll in to prepare them for board level leadership?
Yes, there are tons, and in recent years, more and more for women. Like we mentioned earlier, WIMBoard is one of them, which is an initiative by WIMBIZ. Then obviously the Institute of Directors has a program that you can join to become a certified director. Same thing with the Society for Corporate Governance. We also have a program that gets you board ready. And then there's also the Boardroom Africa, which is also mainly focused on getting women on board. So they have a sort of chartered directors program, and then they also help with placements, right? So they try to provide sort of the entire ecosystem around mentoring, where you can be mentored by very senior board members across the continent, and then they have board vacancies that you can apply for. They have, additional coaching, and they have, sort of seminars and master classes on how do I make my CV look better, and things like that. So there are a lot of programs out there, and I think really just look at the different ones and see which one makes the most sense for you, and then just go for it.
Interesting. So, what kind of challenges do you think that women face in the boardroom? And what kind of obstacles have you personally had to navigate?
So I've not actually had any challenges because I'm a woman. But I know that there are women who face challenges in the boardroom where either, their opinions are not taken serious, or, they may say something and then everyone is sort of like dismissive, and then a man says the same thing and everyone is like, oh George, that's brilliant. A fantastic idea, right? I think it's really about the type of board that you're on. And that's why, I always say to people, it's not just about, I want a board, right? What kind of company and what kind of culture do you want to be part of, right? Are they going to see you as an equal if you're, maybe the only woman? There are boards where I'm the only woman, right? There are boards where I'm the only woman and the youngest. And that sometimes may seem difficult, but the truth is that when you conduct yourself in a professional manner and you also know your onions, then you are able to build trust and also respect, right? And I think that that's something that you just have to have patience to do. I always tell people, when you first join a board, just listen. Just listen and learn, because there's so much institutional knowledge that you don't have that you need to, first of all, soak up before you can actually actively contribute in a constructive manner, right? And make friends on the board. Yeah. That's also something that's important, right? I think sometimes, especially women in an all-male board don't want to be seen as, let's go for lunch or dinner or have coffee. But I think that's really important, because then they also, the other board members, get to know you as a person, and, then they see you very differently than, this lady that is now here with her big opinions.
It's so funny, because I think I joined, when I joined the House of Tara board, I was so apprehensive about the fact that I was the youngest. And Mrs. Awojika was she was the chairman of First Bank at the time, and she was also the chairman of the House of Tara board. And being on a board with people like her, people like Nimi Akinkugbe, Osai Alele, like, it was very daunting, especially being so young. And I remember second guessing myself a lot and thinking, do I even deserve to be here? Like, what am I going to be saying? And I must have made a statement, and Mrs. Awojika was like, listen, let me stop you right there. If you're at this table, you deserve to be here. There's a contribution that you bring, whether you're young or not, that you need to find valuable. Like, so don't, come into a room thinking, oh my God, like, she's like, own it. You're young. There's a perspective that you bring, that no one else has. And you're just learning to sort of own that. So what advice would you give to young women who are looking to take advantage of like board seats are trying to go from operational leadership to having a seat on a board?
So the first thing I would say is get yourself ready, right? Build your network, because it's people who sit on boards that recommend people to sit on boards.
Yeah.
Get your certifications that you need, right? There's some boards that ask for your IOD membership, and if you don't, and that requires you to do the actual certification. So if you don't have that, then you're already ineligible from the jump, right? There are certain boards that will say, okay, you know, have you done any kind of certifications or anything like that? And then making sure that you're clear on what is your unique value proposition in this boardroom, at this table. What type of company do you want to actually sit on a board of? I think that's really important. So the same way that you would not just take any job, right? You would actually say, oh, I want to work for a bank, and this type of bank, and I want to be in this department, right? And then you start positioning for that. It's the same thing. Then I would say start small. Start with advisory boards, start with boards of NGOs, start with boards of small private companies where you can meet other board members that sit on much bigger company boards, right? Because once you demonstrate competence in that boardroom, then other doors will open, right? And I think that that really is sort of the biggest lesson, right? Don't go into, you know, sort of like a race with Usain Bolt when you haven't even trained to race, you know, like a high school student. So be ready, right? Because I think there's nothing worse than being in an environment that you're not prepared for. And in a boardroom, that sort of goes out very quick, right? And you don't want to be known as, oh, we put her on this board and it was such a big mistake, right? That stamp will stay with you. So it's better to just take your time and to learn as you go on. And, you know, a big board is great, but a big board is also a lot of work, right? There's politics, there's a lot of work, there's a lot of hours that go into it. So also make sure that you actually have the time, because you do have fiduciary responsibilities to that company, right? So you can't say, oh, but I had a deadline at work, so I couldn't read the 1,000-page board pack, and you come there unprepared. You're going to be found out at some point that this is what you're doing because you're unable to contribute, right?
Meaningfully.
Yeah, exactly. So I think really it's about, you know, sort of like build your network, be ready, start seeking smaller opportunities, learn and just keep learning, read blogs, watch videos around corporate governance and the trends that are coming up, attend conferences, you know, IOD, WIMBIZ, SCGN, they all have different conferences around corporate governance. And those are really, really good to network, but also to learn what's happening and what the trends are and what you should even be looking out for.
Amazing. So I want to switch gears a little bit to Lara Unlimited. So the film is a workplace drama and it focuses on Lara's career as an oil and gas executive. And we wanted to sort of like get your feedback after you've watched that clip from when she doesn't get the promotion and she has an emotional reaction to it. So you sit on boards and you see like women have to sort of like navigate these spaces and think through emotional intelligence, right? What's your take on how she reacted to it, and what do you think she could have done better? Do you think that something like that would fly in the real world?
So I think it depends.
Fiction.
Yeah, I think it depends on the company, right? So this is a small privately owned oil and gas company. And obviously she's the rainmaker there, right? So she can possibly behave badly and get away with it. I think in other settings and other dynamics, it would be unacceptable and she would actually lose her job. And I do think that it's important, yes, you can be enraged, yes, you can be really angry, but I think you need to always be able to compose yourself and to take a step back and really think through how do you address this, right? And sometimes it's not in the moment, right? Sometimes it's a conversation that you have afterwards. Sometimes you file an official complaint, right? Because in this case, you're bringing in $20 million. Frank, zero, right? And because Frank is more senior, he's getting the promotion, right? And I think there are also other ways of navigating this, right? So for example, there are some organizations where promotions are based on seniority, right? And promotions are based on specific criteria. And if you don't meet those criteria, you are then not eligible. However, those organizations would also recognize and reward someone who is bringing in $20 million with a really good bonus. And if the bonus is better than the promotion, then she wouldn't have a problem, right? So why not go in and negotiate for that, right? As opposed to having a meltdown, right? Because the truth is that this is not the only place you're going to work, right? People are going to ask for references, and when you're known as a ticking time bomb, the higher you get, the harder it will be, yeah.
That's fair. I think this says a lot about sort of like emotional intelligence, especially like in a boardroom, because there's always like debates and, you know, different perspectives on things, and how you sort of like handle, you know, what those debates look like, as in would determine like if you're going to have longevity like on the board or not. And also
if you will continue to be taken serious, right? I think if you, just because your opinion isn't taken serious or counted, sometimes I think, you know, especially when you sit on boards with more senior and more experienced board members, over time you actually realize the value that they bring and that you don't know everything. And that even if you feel like, oh, X is the right way, and they're saying, yeah, we get it, but let's do Y, because Y has less risk, has this, has that, right? And then when you see the outcome, you're like, okay, I get it now, right? I see. Yeah, so I think sometimes we also, you know, especially in a board setting, or in a leadership setting, we need to just also step a little bit back and just say, what can I learn here, right? In this moment where I feel really emotional, what is the lesson that I'm supposed to learn? Because if you're that triggered that you're, you know, using bad language and you're banging the table and you're standing up and, you know, sort of shouting at people, that in that moment you're not your best self, right? So I think executive coaching is one of the things that you can do to make sure that you actually understand, like, how do I compose myself and how do I also manage my emotions properly, right? Because there's a lot of diplomacy that is required in any leadership position, a lot of just, how do I navigate this the best way, right? And sometimes it's not the person who screams the loudest, it's that person at the back that is whispering to the chairman, and the chairman is like, oh, actually, that's a great idea. Yes, we're going to do this, right? So sometimes it's also making sure that, you know, like I said, you need to make friends as well, right? And I feel like Lara is like a lone wolf. She doesn't really make friends. Right, she's very confident, and you know, she knows her stuff.
And she felt like she didn't need allies.
Exactly, right. And I think that if she had allies in this situation, and maybe also visibility and access to the board, right, where she could go and talk to, because obviously this is now C-level management delivering to her. The board has decided. You were not even in that room when the board decided. You were not, you know, no one ask you any questions, or you know, you don't know what was presented to the board in terms of even the value that you bring. So how do you make sure that you also have the right type of access, and how do you make sure that you have the right type of visibility in terms of the value that you're adding? Because obviously, you know, like she stated in the end, you know, like if I walk away from this, your P&L is going to suffer, right? And no board will want that. So why are we letting our rainmaker go?
But I think, you know, in more meritocratic organizations, clearly they would never give like somebody who brought zero a promotion. But I think that the reason I was writing it as extreme as that is there are more organizations in this country that are not as professional, that they may not say it in the room, but their biases, their cultural biases, the politics, maybe I like this person more. So even if they don't do as much business, I prefer to basically like rub shoulders with this person in a leadership situation as opposed to this person who, I guess like Lara, has anger issues and
it's a bit rough around the edges.
Do you get what I mean? And it's like I don't want to deal with this. But because I'm sure there have been times where like you meet certain people and they've risen to a certain position in an organization, and you're like, how did you get here? And then you see them work like Frank, and you see that it's not merit, it's politics.
Yes, they know
like
how to schmooze.
They know how to, yes, like they know how to schmooze. Like that is where the brunt of their work is, not in necessarily the competence or the results, but
and they probably have one very competent junior
that's
doing all the work.
And they're very good at sort of like doing the politics that allows them to move up. Yeah. So even if it doesn't sound realistic, because obviously I wrote it to be extreme, because I really wanted to speak to the heart of any Nigerian employee that has ever been disgruntled, that has ever felt like unfairly compensated, to basically like say it with your mind, say it with your full chest. What I would have wanted to say, right? Like as opposed to what can actually, happen. Okay, we'll switch gears now. Can I have the tablet, please? I want to show you our partners, Bamboo. They've done these mock portfolios, and I want to show it to you to see which one best represents your personality, especially because I know that you're very interested in all this personal finance stuff. Being your friend, I know that you're very into like investing and which one represents you in Nkemdilim? So we're starting this Women Unlimited community, and Bamboo is giving the women in our community 20% off the professional fees when they invest. So, yeah. Okay,
so my Bamboo portfolio is this basically.
I love it. So you have a very aggressive, like. Well, I love it.
I think it
talk a little bit about that, because I feel like you have very interesting ideas when it comes to like investing. Yeah.
So my portfolio is majorly technology stocks, and not all of them do well, right? But I mean, Tesla has performed over time. I think they're at like 690% return. Nvidia as well, 700 and something % return since I invested.
Yeah.
So you do get the good ones, right? And then there are the ones that are just nice and steady. Yeah. For me, it's about trends. It's about where is technology going, what companies are investing into digital transformation and AI transformation, and how are they using technology. So it could be a sort of very traditional company, or a company that you wouldn't necessarily sort of think about as super innovative, like Booking.com. They've recently invested a lot into AI and are building this really massive AI backend. So that's, the type of stocks that I would, invest in. And some of them I have sort of like monthly standing orders, so
it's like it's not up to you, it's just going straight from your account to
and that's one of the things that I love about Bamboo as well, because you can just set it up and you don't need to think about it. And that also, I think, helps you just be consistent with the actual investing.
I love the fact that like it's given us access to US stocks specifically. So even if they have Nigerian stocks, they have treasury bill options, they have crypto options. I love the fact that like things that we see, like trends that we see, whether it's with Amazon or you know, Google, Apple, whatever, like we now have access to participate in, you know, those stock options. So thank you so much, Nkem.
Thank you.
So my final question is, because obviously the premise of this podcast is to explore the fact that women are unlimited in spite of our fears, in spite of our self-doubt, in spite of the obstacles that we may overcome. So what makes you unlimited?
Consistency and execution, I would say. Those are my superpowers.
I love it. So regardless of what is going on, you're always consistent,
Yes.
and you always execute.
Yeah.
You're a doer, I can testify. So thank you so much. This was wonderful. I'm sure people are going to love this.
I hope so.
Because you've highlighted a lot of important points about, you know, what it is to position yourself for board seats. And I don't think it's a conversation that we have enough as, you know, women. Some people don't even think that this is something that's possible for them.
Yeah.
But you've shown that it is. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.